For me, I believe in democracy. That's what I learned being an American, to value democracy. I want a democratic workplace. I want all of us in each workplace together. One of us has a vote, just like the next one has a vote. The men and the women, the supervisor and the non-supervisor, the technically developed, the technically unskilled. We're all human beings. If we're all equal in the sight of God, if we're all equal in the voting in the voting booth, then why the heck are we not equal in the workplace? We belong that way. We should have democracy. And I think the decisions that shape our economy would be better and different if we did that. And I don't have to, the way I used to, argue why this is better, because in fact, history is now on my side, because what we got isn't working. And it is working less well with each passing week, which is why we have the tensions in our society that we're living with. And the propeller of the future is the failure of the present arrangement. At least that's the way it looks to me.
When we see those signs that the economy is unsustainable, what comes next? I mean, I would assume food lines, because as we were talking about in a different segment, food prices are increasing by 5%, possibly by the end of this year, which is an enormous amount, especially since not too long ago, I remember my bill for the weekly grocery going from like 100 something to over 200 for a family. It's insane. People assume that those food lines were because of COVID for whatever reason, the unemployment over COVID. Do you think that once we actually see those long food lines come back when there's no COVID, there's just a faltering capitalism, do you think that will wake people up to what's actually happening?
If we're honest about it, yes. I live in an apartment in New York City. I live across the street from a Roman Catholic church and school, St. Xavier's. Outside of that church, every Sunday is a line of people waiting for a bag of groceries that church gives to hungry people on Sundays. Long before COVID, I noticed, living across the street and walking down the street on Sundays, that the line got longer and longer. COVID has sped it up. That's right. It's longer now than it was before. I think if you're willing to see what's going on around you, and I won't even bore you with talking to you about the people living in the doorways that I encounter in the morning who've slept there because they have no place to go now that the weather isn't so cold that they literally have to go into a shelter, which they don't want to do. But there's also ways of seeing that require a little extra work. When the price of food goes up 5%, it means the family that could afford fresh vegetables and fruits, because they know they're healthier, have to shift to the canned variety. In other words, all these little things, they're going to show up in physical ailments. They're going to show up in mood deteriorations. They're going to show up in mental upset. And by the way, let me assure you, all of the signs of that have gone off the roof. Mental health facilities in this country are overwhelmed. We have a tsunami of physical problems coming down the road because during COVID, people were understandably afraid of going to the doctor or to the hospital or to the clinic because they didn't want to go where COVID might well be. And so they've postponed. We could have set up special facilities for people to go that were where people in COVID didn't go. But that would have taken the kind of planning and organization which we were so badly lacking. And that lack, that's another sign of a system that isn't working, because it doesn't take a genius to figure any of that out. Just like we could have had small schools with proper social distancing so that the mass of our children didn't have to do without school or do a distance school that they couldn't handle because they didn't have a computer or they didn't know how to use a computer or they had to compete with other members of the family who needed access to the computer. All of these failures.
Or the fact that computers do not facilitate learning the way a
That's
classroom
right. It's
does.
not the best way. I've been a teacher all my life. It's silly to imagine that interacting with a mechanical screen is the equivalent of all the subtle things that pass between a student and a teacher. And that's not just in kindergarten or first grade. That goes right through the university and graduate school. I've been a student. I've been a professor all my life. I can assure you, we are paying a price that we won't even realize for 10 years in terms of the educational deterioration that we allowed, and it didn't need to be, to happen because of our system that concentrates wealth in a few hands rather than using the wealth we have to deal with the most people, helping them through this extraordinary experience. I think we're going to look, I want to provoke you. I think we're going to look back on this experience, this last 14 months, as a watershed, as an inflection point, a shift. We are being forced to confront that our economic system doesn't work. You know, the end of the feudal period in Europe was signaled by that famous, horrible 14th century thing called the Black Death. It was a horrible disease. It was not a virus. It was I believe it wasn't a virus, a different kind of disease, but it killed millions and millions of people in Europe. It was the end of that system, not because the disease itself was terrible, it was, but because it exposed the system's inability to solve its problems. When you hear today, for example, well, there's a supply chain problem. We can't get enough chips to be able to make a car. Well, hello. If you're a capitalist, you know you've got to prepare for things not being available. That's what we call an inventory. You keep a stock of things. You know, like in your house, you don't use up the toilet paper. You have a place in the closet where you have a few rolls in case you can't get to the store. Come on. A system that doesn't do that is a system that's broken down. And you and your wife or you and your husband would work out a different plan of shopping if you kept running out of toilet paper. This is not rocket science. It's a sign of a busted system and that we're living in it.